Oh, sorry, you're there. I haven't stopped all day. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Holy Shed. And I hope that you've had a lovely week and you're enjoying January. I know, January. It's that month, isn't it, when it can be dull and drab and chilly and you just want to get it all over and start moving towards spring or move to the Caribbean or something. Uh, I was saying this morning at St Leonard's, I was preaching this morning at St Leonard's Church in Streatham, down in South London, I was talking about a friend of ours called Maurice Smith, who's no longer with us, more's the pity. Maurice was always full of funny stories and often very self-deprecating stories. And I remember him telling the story of the first time he ever flew in a plane. And I think that was in January. It was a very dull, drizzly, horrible day anyway. And he was very nervous and got into the plane and they took off. And of course, as they passed through the clouds, whew, hey presto! Suddenly, you're the other side of it all. And it kind of freaked Maurice out, I think. And he turned to his travelling companion and said, "Oh, look, the sun's come out." And then he wet himself laughing when he realised what he'd just said. But it's sometimes like that in January, isn't it? That you're living under this kind of cloud. And it's good to remind ourselves that just above those clouds, the sun is shining. But this is where we are right now. And I think it's important to still live our way through these days, these grey, chilly days, as fully and creatively as we can, right? Because, hey, this is your life. And one of the things that I do really enjoy about this time of year is that you often get a much better view of birds, when the trees burn, because usually the little buggers are all hidden away behind the leaves and so on. And even now, when there are no leaves, it can still be pretty tricky at times trying to track down who it is that's singing that song up there somewhere. And, Pat gets fed up of me standing there for ages with my camera ready, searching for where the little precious is. But hey, look at this here. This little chap we spotted this week near the reservoir. It's a nuthatch, if you don't know, a tiny bird that a bit like a tree creeper. These are two birds that love to shufty up and down the trunks of trees, and you can barely see them because they're quite well disguised, using that long skinny beak that this chap's got to dig into every crevice of the tree for food. And I only managed to snatch a quick shot, but hey, very, very precious, I think. Okay, let's take a moment of quiet before we carry on to light a candle. If you've got one handy, well, please join me and light yours as well. Let's light a candle for ourselves and those we care about at this time. I don't know what you're going through, what you've got coming up this week, but just take a moment before we launch out into all that to quieten down. Just take a moment, follow your breath in and out, relax. And just let go of all those burdens that we so often carry around with us. Things we can't do anything about, and yet somehow our minds won't let them go, even though it makes no difference. And let's join together in this serenity prayer. It's the Holy Shed serenity prayer, which I wrote way back at the start of lockdown, early in 2020. Some of you were around and will remember. And there are still things in our world, in our lives, that we cannot fully control. But we somehow need to live through them, as fully and as generously as we possibly can. Not just close our eyes and wish it all weren't there, but to, take hold of life, whatever it is that's there. Take it into our arms like, a bride and bridegroom taking hold of each other. Well, that's the rather nice way that Mary Oliver puts it anyway. Let's say together, God, grant me the serenity to live fully and generously through circumstances we cannot control. Hope to keep on imagining better times for myself and the world, and courage to change what I can, instead of simply leaving it to others. Amen. Now, Carla Power, she's a journalist who wrote a fascinating book called If the Oceans Were Ink, An Unlikely Friendship and a Journey to the Heart of the Quran. That's quite a long title, isn't it? But, well, it says it all there, really. And the book is a chronicle of a year that Carla Power spent studying the Quran with her friend, Sheikh Mohammed Akram Nadwi, who is an Islamic scholar. I'm not sure if he's in Oxford or Cambridge, but one or the other. And, a friendship between a secular American Jew, a journalist, and an Islamic college-trained sheikh seems pretty unlikely, really. But they were frustrated, both of them, and bewildered by, the battles being fought in their names, in their different kind of traditions. Both knew that a close look at the Quran would reveal a faith that preached peace and not mass murder, respect for women, not oppression, and so on and so forth. So Carla Power, a journalist, as I say, who grew up in the Midwest of the United States and also the Middle East, brings her own unique perspective on the Quran's most provocative verses as she converses and debates with Akram at cafes, family gatherings and packed lecture halls, in conversations packed with good humour and powerful insights and no small amount of passion. Their story, outlined in this book, took them to Islamic colleges in India, pilgrimage sites in Mecca, as they encountered politicians, jihadis, feminist activists and conservative scholars. And armed with a new understanding of each other's worldviews, Power and Akram uncover eye-opening perspectives, destroying long-held myths and revealing startling connections between worlds that increasingly seem hopelessly divided. She's captivated by Nadwi's combination of erudition, piety and kindness. There's a kind of bit of a sad note at the end of the book. It's well worth reading, by the way. But there's a bit of a sad note at the end where she sort of admits to disappointment that, as she saw it, she had taken steps toward his worldview, but felt that he was unable or whatever to reciprocate in quite the same way. She certainly didn't want him to leave his faith behind, didn't want him to change his outlook. She just wanted him to acknowledge the beauty of her outlook too. And when she challenged him about this, he in effect said, well, look, I'm here, aren't I? Isn't this, an incredible sign in itself that I am here having conversations that many of my contemporaries would never even consider having? So, yeah, it's a fascinating read about a genuine, in-depth conversation and, in a very good-humoured way, argument across differences that took place in different parts of the world. A while back at the Interfaith Forum that I contributed to for 5 years, we plunged into the question of what religion does for women, and that's a big part or a significant part of the discussion that takes place in the book. And for us, this was the first time that I felt real friction or tension or discomfort between the panelists. And one woman from the audience said to me, she told me that the difference between Islam and Christianity is that whereas Islam doesn't change, she said, you change Christianity to suit yourselves, which was an interesting point. Not about Islam or Christianity, but about all kinds of different frameworks of belief, because there are people of all faiths and beliefs who take the view that religion is supposed to be something that's fixed and unchanging. That's the kind of Christianity that I grew up with, and it was always quoted, Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, which was sort of a way of saying, you don't question these things, we just accept them. I mean, weirdly, I think, and mistakenly, the belief was that it was sometimes a joke to say if it was good enough for Paul, it's good enough for me. But there's a naivety, really, in thinking that the faith that I grew up with in my conservative evangelical church was the faith of Paul, or of, huge swathes of Christendom throughout history, which, of course, it isn't. Things do change and evolve. But nevertheless, there's that kind of ideology often that people hang on to, that religion's supposed to be fixed and unchanging. It's something that, an attitude I encounter all the time among Christians. I've often been told by Christians, as well as that Muslim woman, that in effect I'm changing Christianity to suit myself. I recall a Greenbelt seminar where a man shouted at me. I have had people doing that sometimes. I mean, I'm such a meek-mannered person. I don't know why I provoke this in people, but it happens. And he shouted at me in this tent of, 700 people or whatever, during one of my talks, telling me that he had no need of interpreting the Bible. He just believed it. Why didn't I? And of course, that's nonsense. Every single, as we've seen this again and again in the Holy Shed, every single reading of a text, be it the Bible, the Quran, or any other text, be it Shakespeare or whatever, every reading is an interpretation. And it's utterly mistaken and naive to think that you can just simply read the text as is without all the baggage that, of course, we bring to that reading of the text. And I find it really weird and disturbing, really, that people are so often afraid of change. I mean, why should divine revelation be something that's fixed at one time and in one place? And how can one community, one tradition, one text have a complete monopoly on truth? It's just, I can't see it. But none of this is simply about religion. It's about basically tribal identity, which easily leads to fear and prejudice and even bigotry. Every tribe tends to have its own orthodoxies, which it's important to defend and uphold in order to preserve the tribal identity and resist possible threats from others. There are political orthodoxies, economic, scientific, historical, and atheist orthodoxies, and woe to those who question them, as Jesus did in his day on numerous occasions. Now, I'm not having to go at tribes here. I think actually tribes are a part of how we exist as communities of people. It's tribalism I'm talking about, which is basically saying our tribe is better, superior, more at one with God than all the other tribes. So next Sunday's reading in the lectionary, in churches that use the lectionary, next week's gospel reading is the passage where Jesus returned to his hometown at Nazareth. You remember that's in Luke chapter 4, and he began to teach in the synagogue. And you may remember how the whole thing ends up not too good, with Jesus being dragged out of the synagogue up to a nearby high place where the friendly locals wanted basically to chuck him over the edge of a cliff. And that's, pretty drastic and pretty violent, isn't it? I mean, what was it that got them so riled, especially when the story begins on a completely different level and tone, with everybody loving him because, he was getting this amazing press wherever he travelled, in Capernaum and the areas round about. He was gaining this reputation, and the locals rather liked it because he was their hero. He was a local hero, one of them made good. But I think therein lay the problem, because Jesus didn't see himself as like one of them over against the rest. He wasn't willing to play that game, to be part of that sort of sectarian, tribalistic game. So when they asked him to perform, to do for them one of the miracles that he was reported as doing elsewhere, he wouldn't play that game. And in fact, he pointed to two stories in the scriptures, in the Hebrew scriptures, where, God sidestepped the Jewish people, the Israelite people, to bless two Gentiles. This is what it says. Let me just put it up on my screen. So it says in Luke 4, but the truth is, there were many, this is what he said. He said, the truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon, Gentile country. There were also many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. Now, that's a kind of interesting thing, isn't it? So they're all doing this thing of, wanting to claim him as their hero and be part of us over against them. And so Jesus rather brilliantly turns to these two stories in what we call the Old Testament, which are stories of God, as I say, sidestepping the Jewish people to bless these two Gentile people. And as he told that story, in an instant, the whole atmosphere changed. It says, when they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, they drove him out of the town and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. So, clearly I've heard that passage read many, many times, and it's never really struck me the connection between those passages he quoted and what happened next with them wanting to kill him. Clearly there was a subtle message, or maybe not so subtle, certainly not for them, which they heard loud and clear. And it was that this, as I say, this message that he wasn't going to be part of their narrow tribalism. The message was for everyone. God had no favourites. And that turned the crowd against him sufficiently to make them want to destroy him. Right from the start of his gospel, Luke makes the breadth of his message, the message of Jesus, very clear. Both Luke and Matthew begin their gospels with a genealogy, don't they? A genealogy of Jesus, which seems like weird, all these names, so-and-so begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so. Actually, there's an awful lot of really interesting material tucked away in those genealogies. But, here's the big thing. Whereas Matthew's genealogy traces back to King David, Luke begins with Jesus as the son of Adam. Wow, that's a big difference. Do you get it? So in, Matthew's gospel, Jesus is this great sort of Jewish figure, with a genealogy tracing back to David, whereas Luke, who is actually the only Gentile writer in the whole of the New Testament, by the way, he traces Jesus back to Adam. Jesus isn't just the king of the Jews, he's the son of all humanity, as far as Luke's concerned. So, big difference there. And throughout the Gospels, Jesus embraces people who were considered by his fellow Jews to be religiously unclean. The Roman centurion, the Canaanite woman and her demon-possessed daughter, the Samaritans, the Samaritans like the leper Samaritan, the woman at the well, the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. That's interesting, isn't it? That Jesus chooses people who were them, others outside of our tribe, to make them, for instance, the heroes of his stories. Ritual purity connected with food is Jewish orthodoxy, but Jesus declared all foods clean. He said it was what a person carried around within themselves that mattered, not the food that they ate. Evil intentions, violence, sexual abuse, theft, corruption, and slander. These are the things, he said, that make a person unclean, not the food that they eat or their ritually unwashed hands. Keeping the Sabbath, another great orthodoxy within the Jewish community that he was a part of. He taught that the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. And the temple, Jesus called it a house of prayer for all nations, not just the Jews. The big difference in the field of religion and religious tradition is not between this faith or that faith, Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or Sikhism or Buddhism, whatever. No, it's in how we approach faith within our traditions, whether we see faith as an exclusive claim to truth or what I like to call an effort at truth, conditioned by human factors as well as by divine revelation. If an exclusive claim to truth is made, then everyone, of course, has to bow down to that. Everyone has to fit the mold which that creates. Everyone has to jump through supposedly right hoops to be true to the creed or recognized orthodoxy. They have to pray the sinner's prayer, whatever it is, in order to be part of us, to fit in. The big divide in religion isn't about beliefs. I think it's about attitudes and behaviour. It's between those who welcome religious and theological self-criticism and those who say, no, we're right, you're wrong. It's between those who think faith means certainty or something very close to it, and those who see the necessity of doubt and questions, who welcome critical voices because no one can possibly have the whole truth. I don't think the world needs one unified religion. I think that's not a good idea any more than it needs to get rid of religion, and neither's going to happen anyway. What we all need, I think, is mutual commitment to the core principle within every tradition, within any decent society for that matter, which, in the words of, the golden rule, is treat others the way you would want them to treat you. Yehuda Amichai is Israel's most celebrated prophet, and his work has been translated into 40 languages. I mean, he's a universally, respected and loved poet and writer. And he wrote this beautiful poem, which I'll put on your screen. Oops. Do you know what? I don't seem to have it for some reason or other. Oh well, back to me. He wrote this beautiful poem which encapsulates what I'm trying to say today very much more succinctly. And this is what he says. He says, from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard, but doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plough, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. I love that poem, From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow. The place where we're right is hard and trampled like a yard. And that feels very much to me like the kind of Christianity I grew up in. It was like a hard and trampled yard, There was no room for new flowers, new insights, new revelations from outside of our little world to come in and be planted and blossom, But doubts and loves, he said, doubts and loves dig up the world. It's those nagging questions that we have those loves that go beyond the boundaries of our little tribalism. These are the things that, like a plough or a mow, it's a nice image, dig up the ground, turn it over and enable something new to grow there. And the poem says, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. It's interesting because I understand that in the original writing of the poem, the Hebrew that he wrote it in, the house there is a clear reference to the temple that was destroyed, by the Romans, and he's saying a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. That something can begin to be heard again, something can begin to grow again when we thought it had all gone. Arguably, the thing that set Jesus apart and which is most challenging in his teaching is the injunction to love our enemies. His own Jewish background required an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and that's what he said, didn't he, in the Sermon on the Mount? He said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you. But an interesting thing there, actually, and we should stress this, that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth isn't about vengeance. That's what we normally think. That's a sort of statement of vengeance. No, it never was in the Hebrew scriptures a statement of vengeance. If you do that to me, then I'll do that to you. It's actually about limiting vengeance. It's saying never let your anger get carried away, where one thing is done to you and then you pour a whole pile. It was actually a statement of limiting vengeance and recompense. But Jesus said, forget it, he said, that's what you've heard, but I say to you, love your enemies. Honestly, I find that hard. I find it deeply challenging, especially in a media age where enemies, people I don't like for all kinds of reasons, are themselves caricatured, made two-dimensional through the media, stripped basically of their deeper and wider humanity. So I don't see their humanity, all those other bits of their lives. I just see this bit that I dislike intensely, maybe feel that I hate, So it's a good question, isn't it? What does love your enemies mean for us, for you, for me, in a media world? I think it's possible to be right, to be correct about what one believes, but absolutely wrong in the way we hold or apply that belief, So, it's quite possible to be completely correct about something, but devastatingly wrong in the way that we hold on to that, apply it, or treat others as a result of that. Equally, I think I can be wrong about things, mistaken, but still be right, because I'm wrong in the right way, in an open, empathic, humble kind of way, embracing doubt, the possibility of being wrong. So I think that's it. The difference between religion isn't that this one's got this set of beliefs and that's right, and this one's got that set of beliefs and they're wrong. It's much more to do with the whole spirit within the faith traditions and the way that we hold them and practice them that matters. So here's a prayer about friends and enemies. God of friends and enemies, whose love conspires to blur the line between the two, enlarge our souls, that we may gaze into the eyes of another, to find ourselves looking back, even when minds and hearts are worlds apart. Teach us to stand resilient, owning our own truth with integrity, while also attending to doubts and loves longing to be heard. Help us to see that even with the comfort of certainty, truth always comes to us as a crumb and never an entire loaf. Amen. Amen. Okay, I think we should drink to that, don't you? So if you have a drink handy, then I invite you to take it now and join me in a toast. A toast to friends and enemies, to a world that I for one would long to live in which there is not only tolerance of difference, but celebration of difference, the recognition that we don't all have to see things the same way, believe the same things, and that the way in which we live in this world and treat each other is far more important. That's the life that I want to live. So it's to that life that I say, L'chaim, to life. Well, once again, friends, if you like what we're doing here in the shed, you can support us with the help of this link, coffee. You can buy us a coffee or two, or a whiskey or two, whatever. It's all the same. And the link is there on the screen. It's also always at the top of the posts on the Holy Shed Facebook page. And 1,000 thanks to all those of you who support us through this and through other ways as well. It's much appreciated. And I just want to say that, as we go forward into this new year, that, I'm trying to get my head around where we should be going. I mean, obviously, one of the things about being here in the shed physically on my own is coming up with the ideas that are going to connect and be meaningful to you. So I'm always open, and I would especially invite you at this time to send me any thoughts and ideas of topics or things that you think it would be good to introduce in the Holy Shed going forward. I'd really appreciate that. I think I mentioned last week that I'm doing this Enneagram Workshop with Sarum College. Sarum College is in Salisbury. It's a wonderful college with some incredible courses on offer. And they've asked me to run an Enneagram Workshop on the weekend, the 4th to the 6th of Feb, so only a couple of weeks ago. But the beauty of this is it's not online, it's a real life one. So you can come in on a daily basis, or you can, be a resident for the weekend. And it's great. I'm really looking forward to it. So you can check that out. There is a link on my Facebook page. And for those of you who've been asking about Enneagram 2 in my workshops that I've been doing, 19th of March is when that will happen, of which I'll give you more news later. And then on Thursday of this week, I am leading a Soul Space event online, a Zoomed Soul Space, what we do every month with the help of our friends at the Oasis Church Social Group. And you can see what we're doing this week. There is a link up, or there will be a link on my pages for you to be able to see how you can join in with us for that, and that would be great. So a blessing. The blessing of God, the eternal goodwill of God, the shalom and salam of God, the wildness and warmth of God be among us and between us now and always. Amen. Okay, well, I'm going to finish in a moment with a song by one of my favourite female singers, Alela Diane. And I guess the song is a love song, really, but I find it speaks on many levels. It's called Every Path. And I think it kind of links into what I've been talking about today. It speaks, about every path leads back to you. And I think that's what I believe about God. Even the wrong paths can sometimes, that we take, can bring us back to an encounter with God. I like that. I enjoy it. And she's got such an adorable voice. So I hope you enjoy that. Stay human, and I'll see you next week.